Potential is a heavy ghost. It haunts the corners of your room, whispering about the grandeur of the person you could be, all while you sit frozen, watching the person you currently are slowly fade into the gray fog of mediocrity. It is a specific kind of torture to see the mountain top clearly in your mind, to know exactly how the air smells at the summit, yet find yourself unable to lace up your boots to take the first step. In the sprawling steam-powered metropolis of Iron Hollow, the sky was always the color of bruised iron. It was a city of gears, clockwork, and endless industry, where the hiss of escaping steam was the heartbeat of the people. In this city of relentless motion, there lived a young inventor named Silas. Silas was gifted with a mind that moved faster than the great pistons of the central factory. He was 26, with eyes that held the spark of genius and hands that were capable of crafting miracles. He spent his evenings in the local tavern, sketching elaborate diagrams on napkins, flying machines that could pierce the smog clouds, engines that ran on starlight, prosthetic limbs that could feel the texture of silk. The other patrons would lean in, captivated by his vision. "Silas," they would say, clinking their high artificer one day, "you will change Iron Hollow forever." And Silas believed them. He reveled in the praise. He lived in the future, a glorious mental construct where he was already celebrated, wealthy, and admired. But his workshop, a small, rented attic above a bakery, told a different story. It was a graveyard of good intentions. Piles of scrap metal lay rusting in the corners. Half-assembled gears sat on his workbench, collecting dust thick enough to write in. Blueprints, once crisp and white, were yellowing and curled at the edges, pinned to the walls like trophies of battles never fought. Silas had the curse of the brilliant procrastinator. He loved the idea of the invention, the dopamine rush of the eureka moment, but he detested the grinding, greasy, frustrating reality of tightening bolts, filing metal, and failing 100 times to succeed once. "I'll start the assembly tomorrow," Silas would tell himself as he lay in bed, staring at the water stains on his ceiling. "Tonight, I am too tired. Tonight, I need to think." But thinking was just a clever disguise for stalling. The turning point began on a Tuesday, under a rain so acidic it hissed against the cobblestones. The Grand Exposition of Innovation was 3 months away. It was the event where the High Council selected the city's next master engineer. Silas had talked about entering for years. He had told everyone he would unveil the Heart, an engine that produced infinite energy. That evening, the door to his dusty attic creaked open. Standing there was Alara, the city's current, aging high artificer. She was a woman of steel and scars, her right arm replaced by a beautiful, wearing clockwork mechanism of copper and brass. She looked around the chaotic, stagnant room, her mechanical fingers clicking softly, a sound like a ticking clock. "Silas," she said, her voice sounding like grinding gravel. "The city speaks of your genius. They say you carry the sun in your pocket. Yet looking at this room I see only shadows." Silas scrambled to stand up, knocking over a stack of unread manuals. "Master Alara, it's a process. The Aether heart is complex. I'm just finalizing the theoretical framework before I begin the physical build tomorrow." Alara walked to the workbench and ran a finger through the dust. She held it up, a gray smear on her skin. "Tomorrow," she repeated. "The most dangerous word in our language. It is a thief that steals dreams and leaves you with nothing but regret." She reached into her heavy leather coat and pulled out 2 small, glass vials. They glowed faintly in the dim light. She placed them on the cluttered table, pushing aside a half-eaten sandwich. "I am not here to scold you, boy. I am here to offer you a choice, the same choice the city gave me 50 years ago." She tapped the first vial. Inside swirled a golden, luminous liquid that seemed to vibrate with energy. "This is flux wile. It is the substance of creation. If you apply this to your gears and work it into the metal with heat and pressure, it will create a machine that never breaks, never rusts, and runs eternally. But requires friction. It requires heat. It requires you to be here, sweating, hammering, and focusing every single day. If you stop working the metal, the oil evaporates, was lost." She tapped the second vial. Inside was a dark, purple gas that moved lazily, like smoke in a jar. "This is rust mist. It is easier. You simply uncork it. You don't have to do anything. It will seek out the cracks in your metal, the flaws in your designs. It feels good at first, it softens the steel, makes it pliable, hides the mistakes. But if left unchecked, it doesn't just stop the machine, it consumes it, it turns steel into dust." Alara fixed her sharp eyes on him. "You have the ambition of a god, Silas. But the discipline of a child. You have uncorked the rust mist in your life long ago. You just haven't noticed the corrosion yet because you live in your head, not in this room." She turned to leave, her clockwork arm wearing. "The exposition is in 90 days. The aether heart will either be beating, or it will be rust. The choice is not what you think you will do. The choice is what your hands do when I leave. When the door clicked shut, the silence in the room was deafening. Silas looked at the 2 vials. The golden flux oil looked demanding. Looking at it made him feel tired. The purple rust mist looked hypnotic, easy, forgiving. I'll start with the flux oil in the morning, Silas whispered to the empty room. I need to prepare the workspace first. But he didn't prepare. He sat in his chair and imagined the applause at the exposition. He visualized the metal around his neck. The visualization felt so real, so satisfying that his brain released the reward chemicals as if he had already done the work. Sated by the fantasy, he fell asleep in his chair. Days turned into weeks. The pattern was insidious. Silas would wake up, look at the golden vial and feel a wave of anxiety. The work required to use it seemed insurmountable. So, he would distract himself. He would organize his bookshelf. He would go to the market to buy better tools. He would sketch new ideas, abandoning the old ones because the new ones felt fresh and exciting, while the actual building felt tedious. Without realizing it, he had uncorked the purple vial. He didn't physically open it, but his inaction was the key. The rust mist was metaphorical, and it was alive. 4 weeks before the exposition, Silas walked into his workshop after a weekend of avoiding it. He froze in the doorway. The air smelled of decay. The prototype chassis he had built months ago, the one small piece of actual work he had done, was covered in a thick, velvet-like purple oxidation. It wasn't just on the machine. The corrosion had spread to his tools. His favorite wrench was pitted and brittle. The blueprints on the wall were flaking away, the ink eaten by dampness and neglect. But the worst part was the golden vial. He rushed over to it. The fluxel, which had been bright and vibrant, was now dull, thick, and gray. It was coagulating. Because he hadn't used it. Hadn't applied the heat and friction of work. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced Silas's chest. He grabbed a rag and tried to wipe the purple rust off his prototype. It wouldn't budge. It was fused to the metal. He grabbed a file, and sweat stinging his eyes. The metal crumbled under his touch. No, no, no. He gasped, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. He looked around the room. It wasn't just a messy room anymore. It was a ruin. The realization hit him with the force of a falling anvil. Elara wasn't talking about magic potions. She was showing him the physical manifestation of his habits. The rust mist was his laziness. It hadn't just paused his progress, it was actively eating his skills. He picked up a caliper to measure a gear, and his hands, once steady and precise, shook violently. He had lost his touch. He had waited so long to be perfect that he had become incompetent. He sank to the floor, surrounded by the purple dust of his decaying dreams. He held the dying golden vial in his hand. He had wanted to be the master engineer, but he hadn't even been a worker. He had been a dreamer, and dreams without labor are just hallucinations. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, counting down the seconds he could never get back. He was 26 years old, and he felt like his life was already over. The shame was a physical weight, pressing him into the floorboards. He curled up, closing his eyes, wishing he could just sleep until the feeling went away. But the smell of the rust was choking him. He couldn't breathe. Silas lay on the cold floorboards for what felt like an eternity. The purple dust of the rust mist settled in his lungs, making every breath a ragged struggle. The easy thing to do, the thing he had done every day for the past 5 years, would be to close his eyes, sleep, and promise to fix this mess in the morning. But as he stared at the dying golden glow of the flux oil in his hand, a terrifying thought seized him. There might not be a morning. Not for his dreams. If he closed his eyes now, the Silas who wanted to be an inventor would die here, suffocated by the Silas who wanted to be comfortable. He didn't leap up with energy. There was no sudden burst of cinematic music. He simply rolled over, his joints popping, and forced himself to his knees. It was ugly, heavy movement. He grabbed a jagged piece of scrap metal, a broken file, and crawled toward the prototype. He didn't think about the grand exposition. He didn't think about the medal or the applause. He thought only about 1 square inch of corroded brass. Just this piece. He gritted out, his voice cracking. Just clean this one piece. He began to scrape. The purple rust was stubborn, clinging to the metal like a parasite. Silas scrubbed until his fingers cramped, until blisters formed on his palms and burst, mixing blood with the grime. He worked for an hour on a single gear. When he wiped it with a rag, a faint glint of clean copper shone through. It was a tiny victory, pathetic in the grand scheme of the machine, but it was real. He looked at the flux oil. The gray sludge inside seemed to swirl slightly, responding to the heat of his exertion. Elara was right. The oil fed on friction. Silas didn't sleep that night. When the sun rose, casting a pale gray light over the smoggy skyline of Iron Hollow, he was still scraping. He looked terrible. His eyes were sunken, his hair a wild tangle of grease, but his hands were moving. For the next 29 days, Silas ceased to be a human being and became a machine of pure will. He stopped going to the tavern. He stopped sketching fantasies on napkins. He learned the painful lesson that ambition is not a warm fire that keeps you cozy, it is a forge that burns the impurities out of you. The process was not fun. It was boring. It was repetitive. It was frustrating. There were nights when he spent 6 hours machining a piston, only to realize it was a millimeter too wide and he had to scrap it and start over. The old Silas would have quit, claiming, "Bad luck." The new Silas simply picked up a fresh bar of steel and turned on the lathe again. He uncorked the flux oil. It was thick and resistant, like honey in winter. But as he applied it to the gears, working it in with heat and pressure, the liquid transformed. It glowed with a blinding intensity, bonding to the metal, making the gears spin with a silence that defied physics. The rust mist tried to return. Whenever Silas took a break that was too long, whenever he picked up a book to distract himself, he would see the purple fuzz creeping into the corners of the room. It was always there, waiting for his discipline to slip. But he didn't let it. He fought it back with the roar of his blowtorch and the strike of his hammer. The morning of the grand exposition arrived. Silas did not march into the great hall with a polished, sleek machine. He dragged a heavy cart behind him, his boots leaving muddy prints on the marble floor. He wore his stained work apron, because he hadn't had time to wash his formal clothes. The hall was filled with the city's elite. Other inventors stood by their creations, beautiful, shiny contraptions of chrome and glass, polished to perfection. They looked at Silas with pity. He looked like a beggar who had wandered in from the coal mines. At the end of the hall sat the High Council, with Alara in the center. Her clockwork arm rested on the velvet table. She watched Silas approach, her face unreadable. "Step forward, Ed," the announcer boomed. Silas pushed his cart to the center. He pulled off the tarp. The audience gasped. But not in admiration. The Aether heart looked rough. You could see the weld lines where Silas had fought the metal. You could see the scars on the brass where he had scraped away the rust. It wasn't pretty. It looked like it had been through a war. "Present your function," Alara commanded softly. Silas didn't give a speech. He didn't have the energy for words. He simply reached into the core of the machine and turned the primary valve. For a second, nothing happened. The crowd began to murmur. Then, a low hum began. It started in the floor, vibrating through the soles of everyone's shoes. The rough, scarred gears began to turn. They moved so smoothly they looked like liquid gold. The flux oil, embedded deep in the metal, caught the light. The machine began to pull in the smog from the air around it. It compressed the dirty air, burned the impurities, and released a beam of pure white light that shot up toward the glass ceiling of the hall. The light was so intense, so stable, that it didn't just illuminate the room, it seemed to cleanse it. The Aether heart wasn't just an engine, it was a lung for the city. The machine roared, not with the clanking of loose parts, but with the harmonious song of perfect calibration. It was ugly on the outside, but inside it was a masterpiece of discipline. Silas stepped back, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Alara stood up. She walked down the steps, ignoring the shiny, perfect machines of the other contestants. She stopped in front of Silas's scarred engine. She ran her hand over a rough weld. "You didn't finish polishing it," she said. "No, master," Silas rasped. "I ran out of time. I spent every second making it work. I didn't have time to make it look like I worked." Alara smiled, a rare expression that cracked her stony face. "Good. The city is full of pretty machines that do nothing. We have enough dreamers who polish empty shells." She turned to the crowd, raising her metal arm. "Behold the Aether heart. It is not beautiful because it is perfect, it is and has survived. This machine has scars just as its maker does." She looked back at Silas. "I gave you 2 vials, Silas. Do you know what was in them?" Silas shook his head. "Magimi. Olive oil and colored water," Alara whispered. Silas's jaw dropped. "But the rust mist, it ate the metal, the flux oil. It made the gears frictionless." "The rust was real," Alara said, "but it came from the damp air you neglect, not the bottle. And the gears are frictionless not because of the oil, but because you machined them to within 1,000th of a millimeter. You polished the friction away with your own sweat." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "I didn't give you magic, Silas. I gave you a focus. You thought you were fighting a curse, so you fought harder. You thought you were applying a blessing, so you worked with care. But the magic was never in the bottles. It was in the hands that held them." Silas looked at his hands, starred, shaking, and strong. He realized then that the ambition seed and the laziness seed are not external forces. They are not things that happen to you. They are choices you make, minute by minute, hour by hour. He won the medal that day. But as he stood on the podium, the heavy gold disc around his neck felt light compared to the weight he had shed, the weight of tomorrow. Silas became the high artificer, but he never fixed up his attic. He left the rust stains on the floor as a reminder. Every morning, before he touched a single blueprint, he would look at that stain and remember. The rust never sleeps, so neither can his ambition. The story of Silas is the story of everyone who has a dream locked away in a dusty room of their mind. We all wait for the magical flux, oil, the perfect motivation, the right time, the sudden burst of energy. We wait for the feeling of wanting. But the truth is, the feeling doesn't come before the work. The feeling comes after. The magic isn't in the inspiration. It is in the grind. The rust is creeping in right now. It's in the book you haven't written, the business you haven't started, the body you haven't built. It is quiet, it is purple, and it is patient. It is waiting for you to say, I'll do it tomorrow. Don't let it win. Pick up the file, scrape the gear. Do the ugly hard work today, even if your hands shake. Because a scarred working engine is infinitely better than a perfect imaginary one. If this story sparked a fire in your engine, if it made you want to pick up your tools and build your dreams, then subscribe to Daily Motivation Tales. Join our community of dreamers and doers. Let's scrape away the rust together, one story at a time. The future is built by those who show up. See you in the next one.